A few months ago, I did an analysis of the CIT group's interview with Sgt William Lagasse. It's found here on my website, 911speakout.org. You go to the Pentagon tab and you scroll down to where it says Critique of CIT. That takes you to the page I'm looking at right now. But if you just go to the right, it says Interview of Sgt William Lagasse. Or in this page, if you scroll down, there's another link to the same thing. So here we are at the interview of Sgt William Lagasse. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, who Sgt William Lagasse is, scroll down in this analysis to, let's see here, right here, Decoding the Pentagon, Smoking Gun Version. Here is a video put together by the CIT group, and this is a link to the entire video. Now, CIT has produced these video interviews of a number of people. They're claiming that they give a path of the plane that's contrary to the official path. Bottom line is it's contrary to the path that contains all the evidence. And the significance of that is the plane could not have produced all of the damage that we see. So all of the light poles, the damage inside the Pentagon, everything is lined up along a path that goes south of the CITGO gas station. However, these people who were at the CITGO gas station tell a story that indicates the plane came in along a different path. Therefore, the plane never touched anything. Somehow it must have flown over the Pentagon, hidden by a cloud of smoke from an explosion of some sort. And then all the damage, every bit of the damage was faked, was staged. Okay, so that's the scenario that CIT is promoting. Now, William Lagasse is pretty much their star witness. He's the one they rely on to give the most convincing account of this scenario. But if you haven't seen this, go to this link, and if you right-click on the link and say Open Link in New Tab, what I recommend is you keep that open while you go through this article, okay? I highly recommend you read carefully through this article. What I'm going to do in this video is a little walkthrough. I'm going to hit some of the high points and perhaps illustrate some of the points a little bit more fully. So let me give you this video overview as a launching pad for actually going through and studying this article. Okay, let's take it from the top here. And I start off with a little background information about CIT. That stands for Citizen Investigation Team, which is primarily Craig Ranke and Aldo Marquis. This shows the two guys here. There's Craig on the right, Craig Ranke, and Aldo Marquis on the left. There are a few other people who were involved early on, but these are the main two characters. Here's Sgt Lagasse. He is a Pentagon police officer, and he was at the CITGO gas station. So it's a direct line of sight of the impact point on the Pentagon, and it's between the Pentagon and the Navy Annex. I have this illustration later in the article that shows the Navy Annex here on the left. This white building over here is the Pentagon, and the red line here is the line through the downed light poles. The incoming plane knocked down these light poles and went into the building. Here's the CITGO gas station, and up here at the top is the Arlington National Cemetery, and down here the road that comes along the south edge of the Navy Annex is Columbia Pike. So that's a little basic geography. Notice we have here a freeway overpass. Here's Highway 27. The plane came right in over that overpass, and here are the downed light poles, and then there was a generator trailer right in front of the Pentagon, right ahead of where the plane impacted the building. I'm saying all these things according to the standard interpretation. I'm not really going to concede to the CIT interpretation. We're going to look at the CIT interpretation, but they would quibble with pretty much everything I'm saying here. So here's the official path, but it's also what I call the evidence path, south of the CITGO station. Now you can see that if you come in north of the CITGO station, you miss all those light poles, You hit the Pentagon at the wrong angle so it doesn't coincide with the damage path inside. The CIT group gets around that by saying that the plane flew over and there was an explosion that occurred here that created a smoke cloud which hid the plane from view and fooled everybody into thinking that it hit the building when in fact it flew over the building. I don't think that's plausible at all because it would have hit the building prior to the explosion, but whatever. That's their theory. I'm not going to just argue on plausibility. We're going to look at some more significant data along the way. Okay, I mentioned here that I had an interesting encounter with Aldo Marquis on the Truth and Shadows blog. It was in the comments section under an article there. Down a little bit here, he says, "Remember, this all started because in 2003, a very pissed off Sgt Lagasse, who believed there was an airliner that struck the Pentagon, told researcher Dick Eastman that he was on the starboard side of the plane while he was refueling at the CITGO. This is what started me researching what he saw. This is what drove me to fly out to Arlington with the loose change crew and confirm or refute what he saw." And so they flew back to Washington and somehow rounded up these people to have interviews, presumably at the place they were on 9/11. So let's look at the Eastman-Lagasse emails. I have a link here, and I have this copied on my website. So let's go there. Okay, there's some interesting things about this email exchange. In particular, it starts off with Lagasse writing to Eastman, and he starts off, "Dear Sir, rest assured it was a Boeing 757 that flew into the building that day. I was on duty as a Pentagon police sergeant. I was refueling my vehicle at the Barracks K gas station that day." That's another name for the CITGO gas station. It changed names a few times. "It was close enough that I could see the windows had shades pulled down. It struck several light poles next to Route 27 and struck a trailer used to store construction equipment for the renovation. It was to the right of the fuselage impact point. The fact that you are insinuating that this was staged and a fraud is unbelievable. You ask where the debris is. Well, it was in the building. I saw it everywhere. I swear to God, you people pissed me off no end," and so forth. So, Lagasse is clearly testifying to a plane that actually knocked down the light poles and actually hit the generator trailer and actually penetrated the building. And the evidence was everywhere inside the Pentagon. So, even though all of this wasn't what he saw from the CITGO station real time, he spent the rest of that day down on the lawn doing various duties related to rescue work, etc. And he had plenty of opportunity in the rest of that day to examine the crime scene up close. So what Aldo is saying about this correspondence was that somewhere in here, Lagasse says he was on the starboard side of the plane. So let's find that. So I'm going to do a search. And it turns out the first reference to starboard is in the email to Sgt Lagasse from Dick Eastman. Okay, and so Dick Eastman says, "Several people saw the shades pulled down. Were you looking at the port, left, or starboard side?" And so forth. So that was the first use of the term. So the next occurrence is where Lagasse is writing back to Eastman. Now, I think what you're going to find as you go through listening to all of this is that Sgt Lagasse is the kind of guy who likes to use official-sounding jargon whenever he has the opportunity. I notice in particular, right here, AGL. What is AGL? Well, that's above ground level. So he's talking here about the height of the plane is 100 to 150 feet, AGL. So that's the kind of vocabulary he likes to use. And so now that Dick Eastman has introduced the word starboard, he's going to use the word too. Well, let's see what he says. It says, there was a severe yaw into the building with the starboard side of the cockpit actually hitting at about the same time the wing was involved with the trailer. Okay, we have the plane coming into the building, the right wing engages with the generator trailer. In fact, it's the engine of the right wing that catches on the generator trailer. It creates a huge gash. But in Lagasse's mind, remember, I'm not dealing here with the reality. I'm dealing with what he had in mind, trying to understand the words he's using. There was this severe yaw into the building with the starboard side of the cockpit actually hitting at about the same time the wing was involved with the trailer. So he sees the wing hung up on the trailer and the plane swinging around so that the starboard side of the cockpit hits first. So here's what that would look like. And notice that in order to get the right wing pulled back, you're talking about a clockwise rotation. It's actually the driver's side, so to speak, the pilot's side of the cockpit. That's the left side hitting the wall first because the plane has been rotated around. If it hadn't hit the generator trailer, it would have been the right side of the cockpit that would have hit first. And what we're seeing here is the rotation causes the left side to hit. Therefore, what we can conclude is that Lagasse has it backwards. What he's thinking of is starboard means the left side. Now, that would be embarrassing if it were pointed out to him, because like we said, he's the kind of guy that likes to use all this jargon. And he might be expected to know that starboard means right and port means left. But apparently he's confused. Okay, let's go to the final occurrence, which is just right down here. And then he says, I was on the starboard side of the aircraft. Which side of the aircraft was he on? Well, according to his understanding of starboard, we can conclude he was on the left side of the plane. The standard meaning of starboard would indicate he was on the right side, but in fact, he's basically giving testimony that he was on the left side because, as we just saw, he got the words backwards. That's interesting because if the plane flew past the CITGO gas station on the south side and he's at the CITGO, he's looking at the left side of the plane as it passes by. So he is on the left side of the plane, but he's describing that here as the starboard side. So he is clearly testifying to the plane flying along the official path, flying through the downed light poles, hitting the generator trailer and the building. And he was down there and saw that path up close and in detail, interpreting his words as he was on the left side of the plane would be perfectly consistent with everything else he has been saying. He is not trying to contradict the official story in any way. Okay, this brings us to the Lagasse interview at the CITGO gas station itself. The first time Lagasse appears on the screen, he's standing behind his police cruiser. And so the idea is he's positioning himself approximately where he was on 9/11. One of the selling points for CIT is they're doing these interviews in place where the original observations happened. At least that's what they say. So let's see what happens here at the beginning.
Okay, we're talking with Sgt William Lagasse. We're still here at the Navy Exchange, what used to be the CITGO station. We were looking at the Pentagon right over this way. That's the point of impact. We're on the north side of the CITGO station right now. Sergeant Lagasse, can you please just explain to me what you saw on 9/11?
Sure. Basically, I was here refueling the vehicle. Had my door open.
You were standing in that area right there?
Well, I was actually standing here.
Okay. Now that I know that, why don't you come around here to the front of the car so I can see you better and hear you better.
Okay, notice that Craig Ranke is pulling him out of place. Where he was standing is actually important, as we're going to see. But he's pulling him out, presumably because he can't be heard very well. Of course, they could have taken the camera closer if he really wanted to do the interview where the observations were taken. file that away and let's continue.
All right, so I was standing by my door because I had the lock on the fuel to just let it go without me going. And I had a working dog in the back, and I was talking to my working dog. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw something.
Okay, that may be a little hard to hear. What he's saying is he has the fuel lock on, so the fuel's flowing. He's standing by his open car door, and he has a working dog in the back, and he's talking with his dog. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw something. Okay, keep in mind, he is at the north end of the CITGO gas station. The camera is facing north. Behind him in the distance is the Arlington National Cemetery. And so since he's on the far side of the car talking with his dog, he's facing south. So if we had him in place, you would see he's facing to the south. Now, by the way, there's another detail that we don't find out till a little bit later. I'll just fill you in. It turns out he's at the wrong pump. It turns out later that, oh yes, I wasn't at this forward pump, he was at the previous pump. So if he backs up to the previous pump, that's where he really was. So he's facing south. He's near the west edge of the canopy of the CITGO station. So he has a direct view of the plane as it emerges from behind the Navy annex. He has about 1 second as the plane goes from the corner of the Navy annex to disappearing behind the canopy of the CITGO station. It's out of view for less than half a second. Then it reappears, and he has about another 1.5 seconds to get to the Pentagon. So overall, the entire event, start to finish, is about 3 seconds. So that's what he saw, according to the southern path, which is not only the official path, but as we've been pointing out, that's the path he has been testifying to all along. So far, there's nothing he has said that contradicts this narrative. But watch what happens next.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something and turned to look at it. When I turned to look, right about here, I actually didn't hear it. I just knew it was by me.
I'm sorry, you say you did not hear it?
Did not hear it.
Okay, can you come a little closer so I can hear you better? All right, that's good, that's good.
All right, basically, didn't actually hear the aircraft. I saw it first. Heard it after it was going by me.
This is a remarkable moment in the interview. Sgt Lagasse is saying that he caught a glimpse of this plane out of the corner of his eye, and he saw it but did not hear it. That's completely believable if he's talking about the plane which is directly in front of him to the south as it emerges from behind the Navy annex, and it has about 1 second before the sound catches up and he starts hearing it. But what he's doing here is turning completely around and pointing to someplace behind him. He says, I saw it, then I turned to look. It's not believable that he caught a view of the plane back there out of the corner of his eye, because he's facing south. Yet here he is asserting that that's where he saw the plane and then heard the plane as it passed by. Keep in mind, this is the very first time in any context that Sgt Lagasse has asserted that the plane flew north of the CITGO gas station. The only statement he's made up to this point is that he was on the starboard side of the plane, but we've seen how that was an error.
Did you see the plane hit the building?
Yes. Did I see what the plane did? No, because there's a big fireball. When the plane hit, it just kind of disappeared. Like I said, it made that little yaw movement, and then it just disappeared.
Did you see the plane pick up at all, maybe to make it over anything before it went back down again?
No.
So how do we get from testimony that the plane went into the building, that the plane plowed down the light poles, that it hit the generator trailer and went into the building, and here we have it on a path that can't do any of those things? Something is very wrong with this testimony. An honest investigator would pause and look at the contradictions and try to resolve the contradictions. What the CIT group is doing, however, is latching on to this one element of his testimony and dismissing everything else, saying they can't both be true and therefore this one is true, nothing else is true.
All right, now how sure are you that the plane was to the north, coming from the north side of the Navy Annex? You're saying it was pretty much between the Navy Annex and Arlington Cemetery?
Yeah.
How certain are you of that?
100%. Bet my life on it. 100%. Bet my life on it.
Sergeant Lagasse's "bet my life on it" comment is probably the most memorable moment of this entire video. However, this is not investigation. This is grandstanding. All of the physical evidence and all of Sergeant Lagasse's prior testimony contradicts this statement. Yet he was never confronted with the contradiction and asked for his way of resolving it. Instead, the CIT group imposed their own interpretation that the one statement that was to be taken as reliable was that the plane flew north of the CITGO, and all of the physical evidence and all of Sergeant Lagasse's prior testimony was to be discounted. After the Q&A part of the testimony, Craig Ranke has Sergeant Lagasse draw a line on a photograph to show the path of the plane.
Okay, I forgot to get you to draw where you saw the flight path coming, Sergeant Lagasse.
From out of here.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, make that nice and thick for me.
At some point, we need to stop and ask the question, how is it that Sergeant Lagasse is giving this testimony that's so completely inconsistent with everything else he has said? He firmly believes that the physical evidence is real, that the plane really flew through the light poles, and therefore the plane really flew to the south of the CITGO station. But here he's testifying that it flew on the north side. How can he assert that so confidently? I have a hypothesis, and at this stage I'm going to present it as a hypothesis, and then we can look for evidence whether or not this is true. My hypothesis is, since the only thing Sergeant Lagasse has said that even has an inkling of the north path is his statement that he was on the starboard side of the plane. We've seen that that's in error, but he did make that statement. And as Aldo Marquis expressed in his interchange with me, it was this comment that led the CIT crew to fly out from Southern California to the Washington area and set up this interview. So they saw the potential for translating this starboard side of the plane to the plane flying north of CITGO. My hypothesis is that Sergeant Lagasse didn't even have a clear memory of the plane as it actually passed the station. That early glimpse was not something that would form a permanent memory. It was just something glinting, and then he heard the roar as it passed the station, and in about 1.5 seconds, it flew across the freeway and dove into the Pentagon. That's his actual memory. That's where there's something startling to catch his attention. My suspicion is what happened just before the plane disappeared into the Pentagon was a blank spot. And they were able to talk him into a pseudo-memory that filled the gap where there was no concrete memory. Well, you were on the starboard side of the plane. That means it's on the right. That means the plane had to have been over here, right? And they basically would talk him into going along with that. Yeah, that must be where I saw it, because I remember starting to see it when it was passing the station. And as you say, I was on the right side of the plane, and so it must have been over here. So in a sense, he adopted this reconstructed memory. Now, that's my hypothesis, and the question is there evidence to back up that hypothesis? Listen to what Sergeant Lagasse says immediately after he draws the path.
And obviously it's the wrong angle, but it kind of...
Yeah, that's how you saw it come.
Yeah.
Okay.
What could he mean by wrong angle? He comes back and refers to this wrong angle again later in the interview as well. If he's conscious of where the plane flew past the station, and he knows where it hit the building, all he has to do is draw a line between the two. And yet, he's concerned about some angle. There's no angle involved here. I propose the angle that he's concerned about is the angle where the path hits the Pentagon wall. He was down on the lawn the entire day of 9/11, and he was very conscious of the angle where the path came into the Pentagon. And so that would be an angle that's clear in his memory. And what he's seeing in his own drawing is that if he draws the line that goes from the north side of the CITGO station to the Pentagon wall, it doesn't look like that. The path of the plane through the light poles intersecting the Pentagon wall forms an angle of about 52 degrees. That's the kind of an angle Sgt Lagasse was conscious of and was looking for in his drawing, but it didn't look right. That's because the photograph he was handed was not an overhead view that shows all the angles normally. It was a slanted view in more senses than one. It was a perspective view taken from a point north of the CITGO gas station. So the photograph had a definite bias towards North of CITGO paths. If you drew the path through the light poles, it would look like this. It would be flattened against the Pentagon wall, and that doesn't look right at all in this kind of a perspective. That's something that leads to a very interesting result when Craig Ranke shows Lagasse where the actual light poles were.
As I was mentioning to Sgt Lagasse, the official story says the plane came on the south side, and hit the light poles right here.
No chance.
What's that?
There's no chance. None of these light poles over here were knocked down. They were here. None of these were knocked down. They were here.
What Sgt Lagasse is doing here is relocating the light poles to where he drew his line. Keep in mind, there's no question where the light poles really are. But in Sgt Lagasse's mind, there's no question that the light poles are right along the path of the plane. And since he has drawn in what he thinks is the path of the plane, he's confident that that's where the light poles must have been. He's wrong about where the plane flew, but he's right that it flew through the light poles. Sgt Lagasse is adamant about this point.
I'm trying to maintain an even strain here, but these were the light poles. This is where the taxi cab was, right here, not over here. Nothing happened over here, period.
It sounds like if Craig Ranke had asked Sgt Lagasse at this point, "How certain are you that the plane flew through the light poles?" he would answer, 100%, bet my life on it. In this video, I've just hit the high points. You really do need to go back and read through the written analysis for yourself. The reason I've devoted so much time and energy to this analysis is because CIT has been divisive and destructive to the 9/11 truth movement from the beginning. I'd like to read through the conclusions of the original written version of this analysis. I call it the con. I would like to return to Aldo Marqui's original focus on the Eastman-Lagasse emails. Aldo noticed the potential implication of the starboard side comment, but having studied the Eastman-Lagasse correspondence, he also had to have known that Lagasse's actual eyewitness testimony was that a 757 flew into, not over, the building, that it struck several light poles, that it struck the trailer with its right wing, and that the airplane debris was in the building. Aldo had to know what Lagasse was describing was an actual impact by the plane coming in along the damaged path, which was the path south of the CITGO station, and incompatible with their flyover hypothesis. He had to know that Sgt Lagasse was not an actual North of CITGO witness. Yet what Aldo focused on in those emails was that Lagasse had an exploitable weakness. He realized that they could take a single verbal blunder by Lagasse and make it the cornerstone of a theory that the airplane never did any damage to anything and that everything was faked. He had to know this kind of theory would never stand up in court because it was fundamentally implausible, it contradicted the evidence, and this claim was completely contrary to Lagasse's actual knowledge and belief. So they didn't even have a witness who would be willing to testify on behalf of their flyover magic show conclusions. The CIT flyover theory was therefore safe for the establishment because it could never contribute to holding the perpetrators to account. Lagasse told Dick Eastman The fact that you are insinuating that this was staged and a fraud is unbelievable. You ask where the debris is. Well, it was in the building. I saw it everywhere. I swear to God, you people piss me off no end. I live with what I saw every day of my life. It has taken a long time to deal with the images, screams, and anger I felt that day. To be honest, your website angered me to the point I wanted to just curse and rant and rave, but I decided this would be much more helpful to quelling misconceptions. CIT takes this actual testimony by an actual witness to the event and its aftermath and twists it into a seductive theory, appealing only to those with a predisposition to believe anything that contradicts what the government says. While seductive, this theory is so unsupported by evidence that it would taint by association anyone who bought into it. Such an irrational theory could even overshadow the solid scientific work done at the World Trade Center. Although research has none of the earmarks of truth-seeking, it is a con. That is the real con in Pentagon. To what end, you might ask? Yes, that's a question you should seriously ask yourself.